Hi, and welcome to Module 1 of Parenting Together, Apart, a North Carolina guide to successful co-parenting. I'm Abigail Seymour, North Carolina family law attorney, and your guide and narrator for this course. A lot of topics in this first module especially might be well known to some of you already and perhaps even seem obvious, but in my experience as a family lawyer, it never hurts to go back to basics. In this first session, we're going to explore what co-parenting really means, how it differs from other models like parallel parenting, and why it matters so much for your kids here in North Carolina. We'll also walk through the basics of custody law in our state, so you have both the mindset and the vocabulary to move forward with confidence. What co-parenting really means: it's all about creating a structured, cooperative relationship with your child's other parent, even though you're no longer romantically involved. It's about communicating consistently about your child's needs, sharing decisions on big issues like school, health, or discipline, keeping rules and routines aligned between homes, and focusing on what's best for your child, not what is most convenient for either of you. Here's what it is not. It is not about being besties with your ex. It's not about avoiding all conflict. It's about learning to manage disagreements in a constructive way and keeping your child out of the middle. So the difference between co-parenting versus parallel parenting. Parallel parenting is when basically you don't have any contact. You're parenting literally separately. So you have very limited communication, you make decisions separately. It's sometimes very necessary in high conflict or unsafe situations. Sometimes people communicate literally only through the lawyers, and that is not only very expensive, but it's necessary if it's unsafe. So you have to do it that way. But what we're talking about here is co-parenting, because that's the majority of the stuff that we see. When it's possible, when cooperation is possible, it absolutely offers the best outcomes for kids. And that's not to say parallel parenting isn't also really a good thing when it's needed, but we do encourage you to try and co-parent as best you can. And the reason why is that when parents co-parent well, the children absolutely benefit. You can see there's studies that show that they feel more secure, they're less anxious, and they're reassured that both parents love and support them. They have developmental advantages to this. They do better in school. They learn stronger problem-solving skills and often build healthier relationships later in life. And those of us who are children of divorce, if we had parents that got along, we benefited from it. If it was really toxic and awful, it's something that carries over. So we really try to help people not repeat those patterns. So on a practical level, they just have more consistency. They can be better regulated, just emotional regulation. They have regular bedtimes, meals, discipline. You guys aren't fighting over how things are different in each household and things like that. That will make it more stable. Again, this is really all about your kids. So here's a little reality check that even in good parenting relationships, disagreements do happen. It's normal. This key in all this is just having a plan and being willing to revisit those decisions, leaning on tools that you have, whether that's therapy, co-parenting apps, which we highly recommend, or legal agreements, which we'll also talk about because those are also really important for a variety of reasons. It's not about being perfect. It's about long-term pattern, structure, respect, and keeping your child's well-being at the center of everything. All right, let's talk about custody's legal backbone, because that's really why you're here, because you need to hear from a lawyer. So legal custody is really decision making about major decisions. So it's defined in things like education, healthcare, religious upbringing, and big, huge extracurricular commitments. And this type of legal custody, it can be sole, where only one parent decides, which is honestly quite rare, or joint, which is more common, where you really do have to collaborate. And physical custody is just where your child lives day to day and who's responsible for that daily care. Again, it can be joint or it can be sole. Here are some examples of what joint custody schedules can look like. Joint physical custody, by the way, does not automatically mean 50-50. It's about what's really practical and stable. You can do week on, week off. You can do 2-2-3. You can do primary with one person and every other weekend with the other person, extended times in the summer. There are just a multitude of ways that you can divide it up. And it's all based on what is best for your child. That is literally the legal standard that judges use and the law is written to obey, basically, is not convenience, or it's not what the child wants. This is another misconception. Children, by the way, do not get to decide where they live until they turn 18. There is a prevailing myth that when they turn 13, they get to decide where they live, or gosh, I've heard 16, I've heard 12, all kinds of things. The truth is that a child of suitable age and intelligence is able to voice their desires if it's a really icky custody situation. And you can't physically move a teenager who says, I'm not going over to dad's, or I'm not going over to mom's. So yes, they sort of can decide, but not legally speaking. You're not going to go to them and say, where do you want to stay? You want to stay with dad tonight? No, this is all about what's best for them. In every custody case, judges are guided by that very question, and that question only. What is in the best interest of this child? And that means safety, well-being, relationship with each parent's ability to provide stability, and history of things like domestic violence or substance abuse. And that's when you get a little bit more into maybe parallel parenting. Very importantly, our courts do not favor mothers over fathers or vice versa. Each parent is evaluated objectively with the child's best interest at the heart of the decision. We have videos on Facebook that talk about this, and people always get on there and say, don't go to the courts because the courts favor the moms. Or somebody will say, no, they just favor the dads. Like, the truth is, legally speaking, it is 50-50. That is the way the law is written. So here are some terms you're going to want to be able to dash off correctly and not use incorrectly. And this is why it matters. So when you know these terms, the difference between legal custody, physical custody, sole, joint, you're going to be better able to advocate for yourself, set realistic expectations for yourself, avoid misunderstandings, and prevent legal problems like unauthorized decisions. For example, even if a child lives mostly with you, you can't just say, I don't like whatever school they're going to. I'm just going to change schools. Oh, by the way, and tell the other parent, like, oh, by the way, I registered Johnny for this other school. You can't do that. That is 100% not part of co-parenting. And if you had a custody agreement where you had joint legal custody, that would be considered a violation. So it's just important to know what those terms mean. Here's a cheat sheet of some terms to know and some things to understand. Sometimes parents will call us and say, sorry, excuse me, I want sole custody. But what they really would be okay with and much more likely to get would be primary physical custody. Sole custody is actually harder to get than people think, because it's only in very rare instances that having zero contact with the other parent is in the child's best interest. So, common misunderstandings around custody. Parents will say, I have full custody because the child lives with them. But unless you have a court order, then legally speaking, you actually have 50-50 legal custody with the other parent, which is the default. And if the child lives with you only, then you have primary physical custody. Parents often equate the other parent paying or not paying child support as the right to be able to see their child, i.e., if they are not paying, you can withhold the child from them. This is not true. We do not mix support for children with a parent's constitutional rights. All right, so here's the wrap up. Here's the big picture. Co-parenting means collaboration, consistency, and child-first decision-making. Legal custody and physical custody are separate but equally important concepts to understand. And in North Carolina, every decision the court makes comes down to the best interests of your child. And again, I'm kind of basing this on what would a judge say. I'm not saying you're in a court case, but it's important to understand what the law is and what a judge would say if you had a case. So remember, co-parenting isn't about who's right or who gets more time. It's about creating a stable, loving environment where your child can thrive in both of your homes. You will have access, by the way, to this entire presentation, so you can look back over it without me talking. And you can also download the tools. So each module has little tools, downloads, PDFs, and things that we have created for you. So I'll see you in the next module.